Hello, I'm Matt Vanacoro, and I am checking out vintage quality drums from Waves Factory. VQ Drums is a really amazing instrument that is painstakingly sampled in an awesome studio. So this classic 60s vintage kit sampled in a full-on wooden studio has a lot of character and some great sounds. And there's a lot of ability for you to craft the sound and get it to your liking and play it the way you want to play it. So let's take a look at the main interface. Right in front of you, you've got the ability to click on any one of these kit elements and make some adjustments. If the tom isn't tuned to your liking, you can click on that floor tom and then adjust the pitch, the pan, anything you want. So you'll notice right now I've got the toms pan slightly left, center, and right. You can go ahead and just keep them in the center if you want. If you want to use the overhead mics for the stereo perspective, instead of, helping it out a little, you can, but I like to do that. So again, any one of these drums, as you click on them, you've got the ability to make the adjustments. You've also got the ability to select by MIDI. So if I click on the MIDI button right there and I tap the kick drum sound, you'll notice that it jumps to the kick drum for me. So if I tap that and I tap the hi-hat cymbal note, it jumps to the hi-hat for me. So I have the ability to go ahead and make a selection by MIDI. Now, some of these drums you'll see, just the kick drum now and the snare drum open up a couple of extra settings. So for my snare drum, I've got the ability to choose a different model. I don't need that Buddy Rich model if I want the Super Sensitive. A different snare. And for the kick drum, I've got some different beater options. So if I want to switch from the plastic beater to a felt beater, totally different sound, brings out, different harmonic elements of the instrument. So already, without even going into the settings menus and stuff, we've got the ability to configure the sound a little bit. Now I can go ahead and click the mixer button down here to get a little bit more fine control. Now, every single one of these I can click to unload if I'm not using it, if you're really worried about resources or something like that. As you can see, I've got the ability to pan it right here, so I can really make that stereo spread of the kit the way I want to. If I want the reverse stereo spread, by the way, you can do that by adjusting the width of the overhead and the room mics into the negative values. So if you want to go, instead of drummer perspective, audience perspective, you go ahead and switch the width down to 0 and keep going. And once you're in negative values, the stereo channels are swapped. You just want to make sure you do that with both, because otherwise you're going to probably run into some weird phasing issues. Now at the bottom, we've got a dial for bleed, and that is the amount of bleed that's coming from the drum mic, picking up other drums that are not being hit at the time. So if you watch, when I hit the kick drum, you'll notice that the volume for the snare drum goes up, and that's because that kick drum is bleeding into the snare mic. I can give it more bleed or less if I want a tight, controlled, gated sound. Now you see I have it turned off for the toms. So right now if I hit a snare, it's coming through the snare mic, the kick mic, and the overhead and room, because those are the only two right there that have the bleed turned on. So if I want to get a little bit of snare in my hi-hat mic, which is like the bane of my existence when I'm recording regular drums, I got a bright hi-hat. You have the ability to adjust that. So as I start bringing it in, hear that bleed that sometimes we work really hard to avoid. But you put a little bit in and you'll get a nice airier drum track. If you want it to sound a little bigger, if you want it to be a little more tighter and controlled, you can keep it down at 0. Now, of course, you've got the ability to adjust the volume of any of those individual drums. So if the snare is not popping for me, or if it's popping a little too much, you can go ahead and adjust there. And you can solo any of these so that you're not hearing the bleed as you're working on it as well. So if you want to hear just the individual mic, you can feel free to do that. Now, let's take a look at some effects. You can put effects on every different channel. If you want to compress only the kick drum, you can go ahead and drop a compressor on your kick drum, or you can set it free. And you've got the ability to get rid of the effect entirely right here, or to just turn it off temporarily so that you can see and do a little A/B comparison. Now, you can go ahead and compress the overhead mics or add a little bit more. We've got a compressor already on the room mics, add some ambience to any one of them, and you've got your master channel as well. So it's really going from left and right to the most specific to the least specific. And you feel free, all these will, interact and live on their own for you. So you don't need to worry. It's like the snare mic one. If you EQ your snare mic, you EQ it, and then it'll still go through the master channel strip when you're done as well, if you've got some bus compression or reverb or ambience or something like that. So all of this gives you the ability to really craft your sound right inside of the plugin without having to go into your digital audio workstation. And then finally, let's go to the settings page. So for some final shaping on the settings page, I've got the ability to reduce the round robin repetitions and use like no system resources for this instrument. But of course, that's going to pull a bit of the realism out, because every strike at every velocity level independently is going to be the same sample. So I've got 6 different samples per velocity level per instrument. So you can hear that human effect of someone hitting the drum 6 slightly different ways. Or the mechanical effect of the same exact sample every time. Now, you can restrict your dynamic range. So right now I'm giving myself the ability to play really softly. Okay, but I can also restrict it so that I have to play loud even when I'm tapping the keys really softly. So that's up to you whether or not you want to do that. I like to give myself the full dynamic range, so I've got the ability to really express myself. But look, playing with your fingers is different from playing a real drum set, so you've got to adjust this accordingly, so that all of a sudden your sounds are not drifting down in volume just because you're playing with a millimeter less force with your finger. It's a lot different than when you're striking a drum. Now, if your velocity curve is not where you'd like it to be, if you're using an E-drum set, which is definitely a possibility, or if you're using a MIDI controller, you can go ahead and favor the stronger velocity hits or favor the lesser velocity hits. Now remember, it's not the same as adjusting the volume, because all of these samples have lots of layers of velocity. If I tap the snare drum one softly and then gradually get louder, you hear different harmonic effects. You're hitting the drum harder. It's not just getting louder. So if you're finding that you have to hit it way too hard in order to access those higher samples, you can go ahead and favor the higher velocity samples. And you'll get there a little sooner. So that's really great, especially if you're going to plug in an electronic drumming kit and it's not responding exactly the way you want. So now this remapping section can be really important if you don't play with the normal general MIDI setup, or if you're using your own electronic kit. You can go ahead and manually, decide what notes will trigger what sample. So you'll see that I'm taking my kick drum and now I've got it so that G sharp down there is triggering it, or A is triggering it. And I can move it around to where I want to. But you can also MIDI learn. So if you have your MIDI controller, I'm sitting at my electric drum kit and I'm like, wow, I want the bell of my ride to be triggered by this. And I've got a third party, cymbal that's sending a weird MIDI sound signal out. I just go ahead and click this MIDI learn button. Then I tap the note and like, oh, wow, I guess the bell of my electronic cymbal is sending the note F sharp 5. I never knew that. And now it's fixed and mapped the way I like it. So you can remap the kit very quickly. And of course, now we've got the ability to adjust the envelope. So for any of the cymbals or any of the snares, anything, you can adjust the articulation individually, or you can adjust all articulation. So if you want to have less attack, or if you want to adjust the attack of just one thing, like, for example, the first crash, you can adjust that individually. Now, you can mute those cymbals, by the way, individually too. The F, G, A, and B will mute the crash 1, crash 2, China, and splash, respectively. So those 4 yellow notes that are blinking down there, as I hit the crash, you'll hear it's ringing out, but as soon as I press this yellow note here, the F, it mutes it for me. So they're separate so that you can actually crash one and mute the other, which is very handy. It won't mute all the cymbals. You're going to mute them on an individual basis, which again just gives you a little bit more control. With any of these menus, when you want to get it out of the way and get back to the playing, just click on that button again, And there you go. We're back here. And I don't need to even see that if I don't want to. If I want to have a nice, clean interface, I've got it. So that's vintage quality drums. An awesome instrument, a great sounding drum set from Waves Factory.